Hey there. Welcome to Lurkbound. I'm so glad you're here. There's something about the quiet parts of the world, the places people don't usually look, that holds the most chilling secrets. Tonight, I've put together a collection of true accounts that prove sometimes the things we fear aren't just in our heads. They're out there, waiting in the silence. I'm always curious to see how far these stories travel, so definitely let me know in the comments where you're listening from tonight. And if you're a fan of these kinds of stories, feel free to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It's the best way to support what I do here. Now, make sure your doors are locked, settle in, and let's see what's lurking in the dark. I'll never forget the night this happened, even though it was years ago. I was a freshman in college, living on the first floor of an apartment complex. At the time, I had just moved in and was still getting used to the routine of college life, living independently for the first time. It was both exciting and a little scary to have my own space, but I had roommates, so I always felt there was some level of safety in numbers. On this particular night, however, my roommates were out of town for the weekend. I had the apartment completely to myself, which at first felt liberating. I could relax, watch whatever I wanted, eat whatever I wanted, and not worry about anyone else's schedule. I had gone to bed earlier than usual, planning to get a good night's sleep before a busy day at classes the next morning. I felt comfortable and safe, or at least I thought I did. It was late, probably close to midnight, and I was drifting into sleep. My apartment was quiet except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. Everything felt normal. I had never been one to worry much about safety. After all, I had lived in this building for a little while. I knew my neighbors, and there had never been any incidents. In my mind, college life was exciting, and this apartment was my safe little bubble. But that night, all of that changed in an instant. Suddenly, there was a sound that jolted me awake. At first, I thought it might have been the wind, or perhaps a creaky floorboard. Nothing unusual for an older building. But then I heard something else. Something that made my stomach drop. The sound of the front door opening. I sat up immediately, my heart starting to race. I couldn't see much because it was dark, but the apartment felt different, heavy, tense, wrong, in a way I couldn't put into words. I realized almost instantly that someone had entered the apartment. The intruder had broken in quietly enough that I hadn't noticed him until that moment. Worse, I later realized that he had locked the front door behind him. That detail alone makes me shiver whenever I think about it. Whoever this was, he wasn't wandering in by accident or mistake. He had control. He had planned to isolate me, to make sure I couldn't leave or call for help. The thought of it made my entire body tense, my mind racing as I tried to figure out what to do. I was home alone, trapped in my own apartment with someone I didn't know and couldn't see clearly. At that exact moment, a miracle happened. I had gotten to know a few of my neighbors over the first few weeks living there. They were men who lived right next door, friendly guys I knew casually, people who said hello in passing, who sometimes helped me carry groceries, who were always around in the afternoons and evenings. I had no idea that night that they would be the reason I made it through the night unscathed. Somehow, they had seen someone enter my apartment. It wasn't entirely clear how. They either saw movement through a window or noticed the front door open when it shouldn't have been. But they immediately realized something was wrong. They tried to call me first, hoping to get in touch over the phone, but I didn't answer. I wasn't in my room yet. I hadn't even processed what was happening fully. When their calls didn't work, they acted. They came to my bedroom window and started knocking, loudly enough to wake me from a groggy state of fear. At first, I was confused. Who could it be knocking at my window in the middle of the night? Then I realized, in that instant, that these men were trying to save me. They shouted, quickly explaining that there was a man in my apartment, that he had broken in, and that I needed to get out immediately. My heart raced faster than it ever had. My first thoughts were shock and disbelief, followed quickly by pure adrenaline-fueled panic. I remember being lifted out of the window, cold night air hitting my face, and the ground feeling impossibly far below. My body was shaking uncontrollably, my mind struggling to comprehend what had just happened. Outside, the men moved quickly. They kicked down the front door and ran after the intruder, who clearly hadn't expected to be discovered so soon. I could hear yelling, the scuffle, the chaos of someone being chased. Though from my position, it was a blur. It was surreal to witness the very moment that could have been the end of my safety, turned around by complete strangers who had decided in seconds to take action and protect someone they barely knew. I stayed on their couch that night, still trembling, unable to sleep, but finally feeling some measure of safety. They stayed nearby, checking to make sure the man didn't come back, making me feel less alone in a world that suddenly seemed far more dangerous than I had ever imagined. I couldn't stop thinking about what might have happened if they hadn't noticed, if they hadn't acted so decisively. The possibilities were terrifying. The rest of that night passed in a haze. I replayed every moment over and over in my head. How had he gotten in? How long had he been in the apartment before they saw him? What would have happened if I had stayed asleep a few minutes longer? Each thought made my heart pound again. I realized in a very raw, very real way how vulnerable I had been. Living alone, being isolated, trusting that my apartment was safe. It was all just a fragile sense of comfort that could vanish in an instant. The next morning, I tried to process everything. I had to convince myself to believe that it had really happened, that it wasn't just a nightmare. And as frightening as it was, there was also an overwhelming feeling of gratitude. The men next door, people I barely knew, had risked themselves to make sure I was safe. They could have ignored it. They could have stayed inside, but they didn't. They acted decisively and without hesitation to protect someone who was vulnerable. I went home that day still shaking and began thinking about what measures I could take to prevent something like this ever happening again. I installed stronger locks, double-checked the security of windows and doors, and took every precaution I could imagine. The experience stayed with me for years. Every time I walked past a door or looked out a window, I thought back to that night. It changed how I viewed my own safety, how I trusted strangers, and how grateful I felt for the rare humanity shown by the people who were there for me. Looking back now, I realize how lucky I was. There are countless people who face situations like this without anyone nearby to help. I was fortunate beyond words. The intruder could have hurt me in ways I can't even bear to imagine, but because of a few observant, courageous neighbors, he didn't. That night taught me not only about how fragile our sense of security can be, but also about the incredible power of human instinct and courage. Even years later, I still think about it. I still remember the fear, the adrenaline, the cold night air hitting my face as I was lifted from the window, the pounding in my chest, and the relief that followed when I realized I was safe. It's a memory that's terrifying, but also deeply humbling, because it showed me the best of people in the worst of situations. The gratitude I felt that night is something that stays with me even today, a reminder that there are moments when ordinary people do extraordinary things, and sometimes that's all that stands between safety and tragedy. We had only been living in the house for a few weeks, and everything still felt unfamiliar in that strange, half-exciting, half-unsettling way that comes with moving somewhere new. The walls didn't yet feel like ours. The rooms still smelled faintly of fresh paint and dust, and nothing had fully settled into a rhythm. On top of that, we had a newborn baby. Every day felt blurred by exhaustion, broken sleep, and the constant low-level anxiety that comes with suddenly being responsible for a tiny human who depends on you for absolutely everything. The house itself had been empty for a long time before we bought it. It needed a lot of work, and before we officially moved in, we spent weeks going back and forth doing repairs, renovations and cleanup. There were times when doors were left open, tools were everywhere, and scrap material piled up outside. Because of that, the place had probably looked abandoned or at least unoccupied for quite a while. Even after we finally moved in properly, the house still had that work-in-progress feel. Boxes weren't unpacked, rooms were unfinished, and things felt temporary rather than settled. That day felt like any other quiet day at home. I was alone in the house with the baby. My partner was out, and everything was calm in the way that only happens in short, fragile windows when you have a newborn. The baby was in my arms, warm and heavy against my chest, and I was walking into the kitchen, half distracted, half thinking about what I needed to do next. My mind was foggy from lack of sleep, moving on autopilot the way new parents often do. As I stepped into the kitchen, I glanced toward the back door without really thinking. That door has glass panels, and what I saw on the other side made my entire body lock up in an instant. There was a man standing right there. His face was pressed up against the glass of the back door. For a split second, my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. It felt unreal, like my mind refused to accept it. Then the shock hit all at once. This wasn't someone walking past. This wasn't someone knocking. He wasn't at a distance. He was right there, close enough that I could see his features clearly, close enough that the only thing separating us was a thin sheet of glass. I remember the feeling in my chest more than anything else. It was like my heart dropped straight into my stomach. My hands went cold, and every instinct I had started screaming at the same time. I was holding my baby, completely exposed, completely vulnerable, standing in my own kitchen where I was supposed to be safe. The man must have seen me at the exact same moment I saw him, because as soon as our eyes met, he ran. He didn't hesitate. He didn't knock. He didn't say a word. 1 second he was there, face against the glass, and the next he was gone. That didn't make it better. If anything, it made it worse. I screamed. It wasn't controlled or rational. It was pure panic, raw and loud, the kind of scream that comes from somewhere deep and instinctive. My body moved before my thoughts did. I turned and ran through the house, clutching my baby, my heart racing so hard I thought I might pass out. I didn't stop to look where the man went. I didn't stop to think. I just ran and hid. I found the safest place I could think of in that moment and stayed there, shaking, trying to quiet my breathing so I could hear if anyone else was inside the house. Every sound felt amplified. The baby stirred in my arms, and the fear doubled instantly. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about protecting this tiny, defenseless person who had no idea what was happening. My mind raced through every worst-case scenario imaginable. How long had he been there? How long had he been watching? Had he tried the door? Was he alone? Was he still outside? The house suddenly felt huge and full of blind spots. Every corner felt dangerous. Every window felt like a weakness. Eventually, when the immediate shock eased just enough for me to think clearly, I realized that the man hadn't actually tried to get inside. He hadn't forced the door. He hadn't waited around. He had run the moment he realized the house wasn't empty. That was the only thing that stopped me from completely falling apart. Later, once my partner was home and we had both had time to talk through it, we tried to make sense of what had happened. Given the state of the house before we moved in and the work that had been going on, we came to a possible explanation. In the area, there were groups of people who went around looking for scrap metal, leftover materials, or anything valuable that might be left outside renovation sites. From the outside, our house probably still looked empty or half abandoned. He may have been trying to see if there was anything worth taking, or just checking whether the house was still unoccupied. That explanation made logical sense, but emotionally, it didn't make the experience any less terrifying. Because even if his intention wasn't to hurt anyone, the reality was that a stranger had come right up to our home and pressed his face against the glass to look inside. He didn't knock. He didn't announce himself. He didn't keep a respectful distance. He invaded our space in the most unsettling way possible, at a time when I was alone and holding my newborn baby. What haunted me afterward wasn't just the image of his face at the door, but the timing of it all. If I hadn't walked into the kitchen at that exact moment, how long would he have stood there watching? Would he have tried the door if he thought no one was home? Would he have come back later? Those unanswered questions stayed with me far longer than the moment itself. For days afterward, I couldn't shake the feeling that the house wasn't safe. Every noise made me jump. Every shadow outside the windows caught my attention. I found myself constantly checking locks, pulling curtains closed, and avoiding certain rooms of the house altogether. The back door especially became a source of constant anxiety. I hated being near it. I hated looking at it. I hated the idea that someone could just walk up and peer inside so easily. Holding my baby made everything feel more intense. The fear wasn't just about what could happen to me, but what could happen to them. That kind of fear digs deep and doesn't let go easily. It changes the way you think, the way you move, the way you exist in your own space. The house, which was supposed to be a fresh start for our family, suddenly felt exposed and fragile. Even though nothing else happened, the memory stayed vivid. I could still picture the man's face, the way he was leaning forward, the shock of locking eyes with a stranger where there should have been nothing but empty space. I could still feel the surge of panic, the scream tearing out of me, the instinct to run and hide. Looking back now, I can say that it was probably someone opportunistic, someone looking for scrap or valuables, someone who didn't expect anyone to be home. But knowing that doesn't erase the fear. It doesn't change the fact that in that moment I felt completely powerless. It doesn't change how close it felt to something much worse. Out of all the scary things that can happen, there's something uniquely disturbing about danger appearing quietly and unexpectedly inside what you believe to be a safe place. No warning, and no sound. Just a face at the glass. That's what made it so terrifying. Not the noise, not the chaos, but the sudden realization that safety can be an illusion. To this day, it remains one of the scariest moments of my life, not because anything physical happened, but because of how vulnerable it made me feel, how quickly the sense of security disappeared, and how deeply that fear settled into me. Even now, years later, I still check doors more carefully. I still hesitate before walking into rooms with large windows. And every time I think about those early weeks in that house, I remember that moment in the kitchen, holding my baby and realizing just how close fear can come to your front door. This didn't happen to me directly, but it's one of those stories that became family legend because of how terrifying it was, especially knowing how close it came to being much worse. At the time, my dad and I were away on a skiing trip, and my mom was out of state for work. That left my sister home alone. She was in her late teens, or maybe just into her early 20s, old enough to be independent, comfortable being by herself, and not easily scared by normal house noises. It was a quiet day, nothing unusual. She was just relaxing at home, doing her own thing, enjoying having the place to herself. The house was familiar, safe, and predictable. We lived in a pretty ordinary neighborhood, nothing sketchy, nothing that ever made us feel unsafe. The kind of place where you don't expect anything bad to happen, especially in the middle of a normal day or evening. At some point, she heard the side gate open. That alone made her pause. The side gate wasn't something that opened on its own. It had a very distinct sound, and you could always tell when someone used it. But what really stood out was the dog. We had a dog who barked at everything. Strangers, delivery drivers, birds, noises down the street. If someone even walked too close to the fence, he'd usually let the whole house know. This time, the dog didn't bark. That's what made my sister try to rationalize it instead of immediately panicking. Her first thought was that it must be our older brother. He lived nearby and sometimes came over unannounced. The dog loved him and never barked when it was someone familiar. That explanation made sense, and it calmed her nerves just enough to stop her from reacting right away. Then she heard footsteps. They were coming from the carport area, running along the side of the house. My dad used to build things out there, so the ground wasn't clear. There were bits of metal, scraps of wood, loose materials scattered along the length of the carport. When someone walked through there, you could hear it clearly. The sound was unmistakable. Metal clinking softly, wood shifting under weight, slow, deliberate footsteps moving closer to the back door. Still, the dog was quiet. That made it even more confusing. If it really was our brother, that explained everything. If it wasn't, then why wasn't the dog reacting? My sister stayed where she was, listening, trying to make sense of what she was hearing. The footsteps got closer. Whoever it was clearly heading straight for the back door. Then, in an instant, everything changed. The dog exploded. There's no other way to describe it. 1 second he was silent, and the next he was completely unhinged. Snarling, barking, growling in a way my sister had never heard before. This wasn't his usual alert bark or playful noise. This was full-on, feral, protective rage. The kind of sound that makes your blood run cold because you know instinctively that something is very wrong. Almost immediately there were screams. A man's voice yelling in pain and panic. Then loud banging and crashing sounds like someone stumbling, falling, trying desperately to get away. The noise moved quickly, retreating back the way it came, toward the side gate. It was chaotic and violent and fast, like a sudden storm ripping through the quiet of the house. My sister was frozen for a moment, heart pounding, trying to process what was happening. Then she ran to the window. From there, she saw a man she did not recognize sprinting away from the house, fleeing through the side gate and disappearing into the distance. She was absolutely certain of one thing: this was not our brother. This was a complete stranger. The silence that followed was almost worse. The barking stopped. The crashing stopped. The house felt eerily quiet, like it was holding its breath. My sister didn't know what to do. Her hands were shaking, her heart racing. She locked the doors, checked the windows, and waited, trying to calm herself down. Eventually, after working up the courage, she decided to look outside and see what had happened. She went into the backyard carefully, every sense on high alert. There was our dog. He was standing there, tail wagging, perfectly happy, like nothing unusual had happened at all. He walked up to her proudly, mouth slightly open, looking very pleased with himself. That's when she noticed it. There were pieces of torn denim stuck in his teeth, small scraps of blue fabric, clearly ripped from someone's jeans. Then she saw the blood. Not a lot, but enough to be unmistakable. A small trail leading from the back door, across the carport, through the side gate, and off into the night. That's when the reality of it fully sank in. Someone had come onto the property. Someone had walked through the side gate, across the carport, and right up to the back door of a house where a young woman was home alone. For some reason, the dog hadn't reacted at first. Maybe the man moved carefully. Maybe the dog didn't realize what was happening until it was too late. But once he did, he didn't hesitate. He attacked, and he didn't let go easily. Whatever that man's intentions were, they ended the moment the dog decided this was a threat. The fear, the pain, the shock must have been enough to send him running for his life. He left behind torn clothing, blood, and the very clear evidence that he had not expected what waited on the other side of that door. The aftermath was surreal. My sister was shaken, replaying the sounds over and over in her head. The footsteps, the sudden barking, the screaming, the way it all happened so fast. She realized how close she had come to something truly horrible. If the dog hadn't reacted when he did, if he hadn't been strong, if he hadn't been protective, the outcome could have been very different. The dog, of course, had no idea how serious it was. He got lots of scratches, pets, and praise. To him, he'd just done his job. Protect the house, protect the family, end of story. But for the rest of us, especially my sister, it left a permanent mark. It shattered that quiet assumption of safety. The idea that being home, behind closed doors, automatically means you're protected. It showed just how thin that barrier really is, and how quickly someone can cross it. Even now, years later, when the story comes up, there's always a pause at the end. That moment where everyone silently thinks about the what-ifs. What if the dog hadn't been there? What if he hadn't woken up in time? What if my sister had gone to open the door, thinking it was our brother? It's terrifying not because of what happened, but because of what almost did. And every time someone talks about good dogs, loyal dogs, protective dogs, this story comes up. Because that day, our dog didn't just scare off an intruder. He may have saved my sister's life. For a long time, we couldn't say anything for sure. There was never hard proof, no clear moment where we caught him in the act. But looking back now, putting all the pieces together, it's very hard for me to believe it was anything other than what we suspected. We believe our neighbor somehow found one of our spare keys and was secretly sneaking into our house. It started with my sister. He lived next door and had clearly developed an unhealthy obsession with her. At first, it didn't seem dangerous, just uncomfortable. He would linger too long when he saw her outside, try to start conversations that felt forced, and watch her in a way that made everyone uneasy. Over time, it became obvious he was following her social media closely. He knew things he shouldn't have known. Where she went, who she spent time with, or small details that hadn't been shared with him directly. Eventually, it crossed a line. My mum confronted him and very clearly told him to stay away from our family and never contact us again. She didn't sugarcoat it. She made it clear that his behavior was not welcome and that he was making us uncomfortable. After that conversation, we thought the situation would die down. Instead, that's when things started getting really strange. Not long after, we began noticing small things around the house that didn't make sense. Items would be slightly out of place, nothing dramatic at first. Something moved from where we were sure we'd left it. A cabinet door that seemed off. Then one day, there was a large bag of flour sitting on our kitchen counter. No one in our family had bought it. We asked each other about it. Everyone said the same thing. No idea where it came from. It hadn't been there earlier. It wasn't something any of us would randomly buy in bulk. It was just there, sitting on the counter like it belonged. That was the moment when the uneasiness really set in. Around the same time, our neighbor's behavior outside the house became more noticeable. He seemed to be leaving his house at the exact same time as us, over and over again. At first, it felt like coincidence. People have routines. Neighbors leave for work around similar times. That's normal, but it kept happening. We would be talking inside the house about plans we had coming up. A trip, an outing, something casual. Then, when one of us stepped outside, he would suddenly appear, and start talking about how he had the exact same plans, same destination, same timing, same idea. One time, and we talked about going to Yosemite, just a casual family conversation, nothing posted online, nothing mentioned to anyone outside the house. Later that day, as I was leaving, he stopped me and started talking about how badly he wanted to take his kids to Yosemite. I remember thinking it was a weird coincidence, but still brushing it off. Then it happened again, and again. It became so frequent that it stopped feeling random. No matter what we talked about inside the house, he seemed to know. Not just general ideas, but specific places, specific timing. It felt like our private conversations weren't private at all. Eventually, I asked my mom about it. That's when she finally told me everything. She explained that a spare key had gone missing. We couldn't remember exactly when or how, but it wasn't where it was supposed to be. And given his behavior, the timing, and the strange things happening in the house, they had started to suspect the worst. They believed he might be entering our home when we weren't there, that he could be listening in somehow, or watching through windows, or simply letting himself in, moving around, learning our routines. It sounded extreme. Even as I heard it, part of my brain wanted to reject it. It felt like something out of a movie, but the more I thought about it, the less ridiculous it seemed. The coincidences were too exact, too consistent. At one point, we even tested it. We made up fake plans, completely false outings. One of us would casually mention them inside the house, knowing full well we weren't actually going anywhere. Then, someone would step outside. Sure enough, he would appear. And he would talk about how he was planning to go to that exact place. I remember one specific time when we mentioned Disneyland as a fake plan. We hadn't talked about Disneyland in years. Yet when one of us went outside, there he was, talking excitedly about how he was thinking of taking his kids to Disneyland. That was when it stopped feeling coincidental altogether. The house no longer felt safe. Then came the night that truly broke something in me. I got home from work around 10:30 at night. Everyone else was already home. I remember locking the door carefully, sliding the latch into place. I even remember checking it, that small habit you do without thinking. I sat down in the living room to watch TV, trying to unwind after work. The house was quiet. A few minutes later, I heard it. The sound of someone moving quickly but quietly down the stairs. It wasn't heavy, it wasn't careless. It sounded like someone who knew the house and was trying not to make noise. Then I heard the door. It opened, closed, locked. I froze. I stood up slowly, my heart pounding. My first thought was that it had to be my sister or maybe her boyfriend. That was the only explanation that made sense. I walked toward the door, and that's when I saw the latch. It was still swinging back and forth. That image is burned into my memory. The latch, moving, settling, proof that someone had just used it seconds before. I went upstairs, my stomach in knots, calling out softly. Everyone was asleep, every single person. No one had gone downstairs. No one had left the house. I felt all the color drain from my face. I woke everyone up. We checked the house together. Doors, windows. Nothing forced. Nothing broken. No explanation. Once we all confirmed that no one had come in or gone out, we called the police. They came. They listened. They looked around. There was nothing they could do. No signs of forced entry. No evidence. No suspect they could act on. From their point of view, it was just a strange noise and a scared family. The next day, we changed all the locks, every single one. And after that, the strange things stopped. No more misplaced items. No more impossible coincidences. No more matching plans. No more feelings of being watched. It was like a switch had been flipped. About a week later, the neighbor moved out. We found out his wife had divorced him because of an affair. He packed up and left. We never saw him again. There was never proof, no confession, and no camera footage. Nothing concrete we could point to and say, this is exactly what happened. But after he left, the problems vanished completely. The house felt normal again. Quiet, safe. We had called the police multiple times before that night as well, for disturbances outside the house. Sounds, movement, things that never led to anything official. Always just enough to make us uneasy, never enough to prove anything. To this day, I still struggle to rationalize it all. I try to tell myself there must be another explanation, that our minds filled in the gaps, that coincidence played tricks on us. But deep down, I don't believe that. Too many things lined up, too many moments where he knew things he shouldn't have known, too many times where the fear in my gut felt real, immediate and justified. What scares me the most isn't just the idea that someone might have been inside our home. It's the thought of how quietly it happened, how easily, how long it might have gone on without us realizing it, how normal everything looked on the surface while something deeply wrong was happening underneath. We never had another incident after that, but even now, years later, I still double-check locks. I still notice when something feels off, and every once in a while I think about that latch swinging back and forth, and I wonder just how close we were to something much worse. That night is burned into my memory in a way I don't think will ever fade. It wasn't dramatic in the way horror movies are, with loud noises or something jumping out at me. It was quiet, slow, and deeply unsettling, which somehow made it worse. I was home alone, which wasn't unusual, but there was always something about being alone in that house that felt different. The house had a way of making silence feel heavy, like it was pressing down on you instead of surrounding you. I had learned that feeling over time, but that night it felt sharper, more intense, like the house itself was holding its breath. I was sitting on the couch, half watching something on TV, half dozing, when my dog suddenly stood up. At first, I didn't think much of it. Dogs notice things all the time. Sounds outside, a car passing, a random noise you'd never hear. But this was different. She wasn't just alert, she was frozen, completely still. Her body stiffened like a statue, and her attention locked onto the hallway that led deeper into the house. Then she started growling. It wasn't the playful kind of growl, or the kind she made when someone knocked on the door. This was low, deep. It came from somewhere deep in her chest, the kind of sound that vibrates instead of just being heard. The hair along her back slowly lifted until it formed a full ridge, like a mohawk running from her neck down her spine. I had never seen her like that before, not once. It was the kind of reaction you'd expect if there were a stranger standing right there in front of her, but there was nothing I could see. The hallway was dark, but not pitch black. There was enough light coming from the living room that I should have been able to see movement if something was there. But I didn't see anything. No shadow, no shape, no reflection. Just my dog standing there, staring into empty space like she was watching something that wasn't meant for me to see. My stomach dropped. I didn't call out. I didn't move. I barely breathed. Every instinct in my body told me not to draw attention to myself. I remember gripping the edge of the couch so tightly my fingers hurt. My mind raced, trying to explain what I was seeing in some logical way. Maybe she heard something in the walls, maybe a mouse, maybe the house settling. But none of those explanations matched her body language. She wasn't curious. She wasn't confused. She was angry and afraid at the same time. The growling continued. I, steady and relentless, aimed directly down the hallway. I kept waiting for her to bark or lunge, but she didn't. She just stood there, muscles tight, ready for something to happen. That made it worse. Barking would have felt normal. This silence felt intentional, like she didn't want to give away her position. I finally realized I wasn't going back to my bedroom. There was absolutely no chance of that happening. My room was down that hallway, past the exact spot she was staring at. Even the thought of walking in that direction made my chest tighten. I stayed exactly where I was, sitting on the couch, my eyes locked between the TV glow and the dark hallway, afraid to look too long, but unable to look away. At some point, the growling stopped. That should have been a relief, but it wasn't. In some ways, it was worse. She stayed standing, still watching the same spot, like whatever had caught her attention hadn't left, only changed. I don't know how long that lasted. Time felt distorted, stretched thin. Minutes felt like hours. Every sound in the house felt amplified. A tiny creak sounded like footsteps. The hum of electricity felt too loud. I didn't sleep, not really. I drifted in and out of shallow, uncomfortable half-sleep, jolting awake at every small noise. My dog never went back to her bed. She stayed close to me, sometimes standing, sometimes sitting, but always alert. Every now and then, she'd glance back toward the hallway like she was checking to see if something had moved. I kept thinking about how this house seemed to do this kind of thing when people were alone. It wasn't just me. There had been other moments, other stories, other nights when someone would say something strange happened while they were by themselves. Doors sounding like they opened when no one was there. Footsteps when everyone else was asleep. That feeling of being watched that hits you for no clear reason. When multiple people experience the same kind of unease, it stops feeling like imagination. The worst part wasn't fear in the dramatic sense. It was the waiting for something to happen, waiting for confirmation that there really was something there, waiting for the night to end. I remember checking the time over and over, watching the minutes crawl forward. I never wanted time to move faster so badly in my life. When the sky finally began to lighten, I felt something close to relief for the first time. The darkness slowly softened, shadows losing their sharp edges. My dog finally relaxed enough to lie down, though she stayed close. When the sun fully rose, flooding the living room with morning light, I felt like I could breathe again. I've never been happier to see a sunrise. That night didn't give me answers. I still have no idea what my dog saw, or sensed, or reacted to. Maybe there was something there. Maybe there wasn't. But what I do know is that animals don't fake fear like that. They don't imagine things the way humans do. Whatever triggered her reaction was real to her, and that was enough to convince me to trust my instincts. Even now, I think about it whenever I'm alone in a quiet house. That deep growl, that rigid stance, that feeling that something unseen was sharing the space with me. Some houses just carry something in them, a heaviness, a presence. And when you're alone, there's no distraction, no buffer. It feels closer, louder, more aware. I still don't go back to my room when something like that happens. I listen, I wait, and I trust my dog more than my eyes. This might sound calmer when I say it out loud now, but at the time it was one of the most frightening experiences of my life, and even years later, it still comes back to me in pieces. I live in Gilroy, a small town that most people only know for one thing: garlic. It's what we're famous for, what we joke about, and what brings in crowds of people every year for the Garlic Festival. For us locals, the festival was always a symbol of community. Families came out together, kids ran around with food in their hands, music played, and it felt safe in the way small-town traditions usually do. In November 2019, during the Garlic Festival, that feeling was shattered completely. I wasn't at the festival that day. I was at home, going about my day like normal, not thinking much of anything. Or the festival was just part of the background noise of life in Gilroy. Traffic would be heavier, sure, and there would be people everywhere, but nothing about it ever felt dangerous. Then the news started to spread. At first it was confusing and slow, the way these things often are. Messages, alerts, people calling each other, asking if they'd heard anything. There had been a shooting at the festival. As more information came out, the situation became terrifyingly real. 2 people were confirmed dead early on. One of them was someone I knew. That detail alone made everything hit differently. It wasn't just something tragic happening somewhere else. It was personal. It was close. It was suddenly part of my own life, my own town, my own circle. The shooter was named Santino William Legan, though at the time all we knew was that he had fled the festival. He wasn't caught. He was still out there. That was the part that made the fear sink in deep. The danger wasn't over. It was moving. As the minutes passed, it became clear that he was running through neighborhoods, trying to escape the police. Multiple neighborhoods. And then we heard the words that made my stomach drop. He was in our area, not nearby in some vague way, but actually on our street. I remember the moment we realized just how close he was. The atmosphere inside our house changed instantly. The normal sounds of home disappeared, replaced by a heavy, tense silence, broken only by distant chaos. Then we heard it. Gunshots. Sharp, loud, unmistakable. Not on the TV, not on the radio. Outside, close enough that you didn't need to wonder what they were. For about 6 minutes, which felt like an hour, my family and I listened to him shooting. Those 6 minutes are burned into my memory in fragments. The sound of shots echoing through the neighborhood, the feeling of my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might break through my chest, the way time seemed to slow down while also racing forward. Every shot made us flinch. Every pause made us wonder if he was moving closer. We didn't know what he was doing, where exactly he was, or if he was trying to break into houses. We only knew that a man who had already killed people was nearby and still firing his weapon. That knowledge changes the way you think instantly. Your brain goes into survival mode. All the normal rules disappear. We turned off all the lights in the house, every single one. We locked the doors, double-checked them, and then checked them again. Windows were avoided completely. No one wanted to be near anything that could make us visible. We gathered together, moving quietly, almost instinctively, like we were trying not to remind the world that we existed. We ended up hiding in my dad's closet. It wasn't big or comfortable, but it felt like the safest place we had. Enclosed, out of sight, a place where we could all be together. I remember how cramped it felt, how close everyone was, and how that closeness was both comforting and terrifying at the same time. We were huddled together, listening. That's when my dad pulled out a shotgun. I didn't even know he owned one. Seeing it shocked me almost as much as hearing the gunshots outside. It made the situation feel even more real. This wasn't just fear anymore. It was preparation for the worst. My dad positioned himself near the window, careful but alert, watching outside while the rest of us stayed hidden. The look on his face is something I'll never forget. It was focused, serious, and protective in a way I had never seen before. We didn't talk much. There wasn't anything to say. Words felt useless. Every sound outside made us tense. A car passing, footsteps, another shot. The uncertainty was the hardest part, not knowing when it would end or how. At one point, I remember hearing what would turn out to be the last gunshot. At the time, I didn't know it was the last. It was just another loud crack that made my stomach twist. Then there was silence. A strange, heavy silence that didn't feel comforting right away. Silence can be just as scary when you're waiting for something terrible to happen. We stayed where we were. No one moved. No one relaxed. We didn't dare assume it was over. About a minute later, there was a knock on the door. That sound almost made my heart stop. In that moment, you don't know who it is. You don't know if it's safe. You don't know if opening the door is the right choice. My dad approached carefully. When the police identified themselves, the relief came crashing down all at once, mixed with exhaustion and shock. They told us the shooter had shot himself. Just like that, it was over. A man who had caused so much damage, so much fear, had ended his life just meters away from us. About 30 meters. That distance is nothing. It's closer than most people realize. Close enough that we heard him. Close enough that if things had gone slightly differently, our story might have ended another way. When I think back on it now, it still feels unreal. Writing it out makes me realize how intense it truly was, even if at the time my brain tried to downplay it as a coping mechanism. I remember thinking afterward that it wasn't as bad as other stories I'd heard, but fear isn't a competition. In that moment, for those 6 minutes, it felt like the world had narrowed down to survival alone. What stayed with me most wasn't just the noise or the chaos, but the feeling of vulnerability, the realization that something so violent and random could come right into your neighborhood, right to your street, without warning. Home is supposed to be the safest place. That night, it didn't feel that way at all. Even though none of my family was physically hurt, the experience left a mark. Loud noises still make me jump. News of shootings hits closer to home now, literally and emotionally. And every time the Garlic Festival comes around, it carries a weight it never had before. It's no longer just about garlic and food and music. It's also a reminder of how quickly normal life can turn into something terrifying. At the end of it all, I'm grateful. Grateful that my family was safe. Grateful that the situation ended when it did. But I'll never forget that night, or the knowledge that for a few minutes, a mass shooter was right there, just steps away, and our lives hung in the balance without us being able to do anything but hide and hope. I am sorry for the interruption. I hate breaking the flow, but I am curious. Do you believe there is some truth to every story like this? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to hear more, please subscribe. Okay, let's get back to it. When I think back to my childhood, this memory always comes back in fragments, like something my mind kept blurry on purpose. I grew up in a small town in the Northeast, the kind of place where nothing ever really happened. Everyone knew everyone. Doors were often left unlocked during the day, and danger felt like something that belonged in big cities or on the news, not in our quiet neighborhood. I was still pretty young at the time. My parents had gone out to dinner one evening. Nothing unusual, just a normal night out. I was home with my older brother, who was old enough to feel responsible, but still young enough to panic when things went wrong. It was probably around 8 or 9 at night. I remember the sun was still out, that late evening light where everything feels calm and ordinary. Then the doorbell rang. That alone wasn't scary. People stopped by all the time. Neighbors, friends, sometimes someone needing directions. My brother and I went to the door together. When we opened it, there was no one there. The porch was empty. No footsteps, no car pulling away. Nothing, just quiet. We stood there for a second, confused. I remember leaning forward, looking down the steps, expecting to see someone walking away, or maybe hiding behind a bush as a prank. But there was nothing. The street looked normal. The air felt normal. After a moment, we shrugged it off. Kids do that. If something doesn't immediately make sense, you just move on. We went back inside and carried on with whatever we were doing. Time passed. An hour, maybe 2. At some point, we ended up in the basement. That's where the TV was. And that's usually where we hung out when our parents weren't home. The basement always felt a little colder, a little darker, but it was familiar. Then we heard it. A knock. Not at the front door, not the back door. It was coming from the door that led into the garage. That detail is what still makes my stomach tighten when I think about it. Because that meant whoever knocked wasn't outside the house. They were already inside the garage. The sound echoed in the basement, dull and heavy. It wasn't loud, but it was clear. Someone was on the other side of that door. My brother and I looked at each other, and in that moment, everything shifted. The confusion from earlier turned into fear. Real fear. The kind that makes your chest feel tight and your thoughts scatter. We didn't talk. We didn't try to listen more closely. We just ran. We bolted upstairs as fast as we could, our footsteps pounding on the stairs, hearts racing. I remember feeling like the house suddenly felt wrong, like it wasn't ours anymore. Every shadow felt deeper. Every sound felt too loud. My brother went straight for the door to the garage. I stood a few steps back, frozen, watching him. When he opened the door, the garage door itself was open, wide open. Outside, it was pitch black, no lights, no movement, just darkness. That image is burned into my memory. The open garage door, the black night beyond it, and the feeling that something had been there moments before, something we had just missed. My brother slammed the garage door shut and locked it. He checked the lock twice. I remember my hands shaking. I remember thinking that if someone wanted to get in, they already knew how. And this was the late 90s. Around 1999 maybe. Cell phones weren't something everyone had. We didn't have one. The house phone was in the kitchen, hanging on the wall. We talked about calling the police, but we didn't. We were kids, and we thought we would get in trouble. We thought our parents would be mad that we called over nothing. So we stayed quiet. We stayed upstairs. We turned on lights. We waited. Those hours felt endless. Every creak of the house made me jump. Every sound outside made my heart race. I don't remember exactly what we did to pass the time. I just remember waiting for the sound of my parents' car in the driveway, like it was the only thing that could make the house feel safe again. When my parents finally came home, we told them everything. The doorbell, the knock from the garage, the open garage door, and the darkness outside. They didn't believe us. They brushed it off, said we must have imagined it, said maybe the garage door had been left open earlier, said kids get scared when they're home alone. At the time, that almost felt worse than the fear itself. We knew what we heard. We knew what we saw. But there was no proof, and eventually, life moved on. Time passed. Weeks later, maybe longer, my brother and I were riding our four-wheeler out behind the house. There was a huge field that stretched out behind our property, connecting all the way to a nearby airport. It was a place we loved, open, wild, full of tall grass and dirt paths. It felt like freedom. While riding, we came across something strange about halfway through the field. It looked like a makeshift hideout, and there were signs that someone had been staying there, a spot where a fire had clearly been built, torn pieces of clothing scattered around, empty water bottles, things that didn't belong out there, things that hadn't blown in by accident. At the time, we thought it was cool. That's how kids think. It felt like discovering something secret, something mysterious. We joked about it. We imagined stories about who might have been there. Then we forgot about it. But later, much later, the memory came back. I started thinking about that night. The doorbell, the knock from inside the garage, the open garage door, and then the hideout in the field behind our house, connected to an airport, a place where someone could come and go without being noticed. That's when it hit me. Someone had been close, too close. Someone may have been watching our house, testing it, ringing the doorbell to see if anyone was home, coming into the garage later thinking the house was empty, and when they realized someone was inside, they left. Or maybe we interrupted something worse. The thought makes my skin crawl even now. As a kid, I didn't have the ability to connect those dots. As an adult, it feels terrifying. The idea that someone might have been living nearby, hiding out in that field, watching our house, knowing our routines. What scares me most is how easily it could have gone differently if my brother had opened the garage door a few seconds earlier, if we had gone to investigate the knock instead of running, if whoever it was had decided not to leave. Nothing technically happened. No one was hurt, no one broke in, no one was caught. But sometimes, the scariest experiences are the ones that end without answers. Even now, I think about that night when I hear an unexplained knock or see a door left open. I think about how safe I thought I was and how thin that sense of safety really is. And I wonder who was out there, standing in the dark, just beyond the edge of our home, and how close we came to something much worse. Whenever I am home alone, it always starts the same way. I sit down on the couch, trying to relax, telling myself it's just another quiet moment to enjoy some peace. The television is on in front of me, playing a movie or a video, something familiar that I've already seen before. I keep the volume at a comfortable level, not too loud, not too quiet. To my left is the hallway that leads deeper into the house, and just beyond that is the kitchen. It's an open line of sight, one that I've looked down thousands of times before without ever thinking twice about it. Yet every single time I am alone, that space feels different, like it's holding something back. At first, everything feels normal. I focus on the screen, letting my mind sink into whatever I'm watching. The glow of the TV fills the room, and for a while, it feels safe. But then, it happens. I glance away for just a second, maybe to stretch, maybe because something caught my attention, and in that brief moment I see them. Faces. Not clear faces, not detailed enough to recognize, but faces all the same. Shapes that look like heads stacked together, crowded and unsettling, almost like the boxed bodies from Doom Eternal. It's never just one, it's always more than one, layered and watching, filling the hallway and the edge of the kitchen doorway. The instant I realize what I'm seeing, my heart jumps. There's a sharp rush of fear that hits my chest before my brain can even catch up. It feels like my body reacts before my thoughts do, like some deep instinct is screaming at me to pay attention. I turn my head fully, forcing myself to look directly at where the faces were, but the moment I do, they vanish. The hallway is empty. The kitchen is empty. Nothing is there. No movement, no shadows, no signs that anything was ever there at all. I sit there, staring, trying to slow my breathing. I tell myself it's just my imagination, that it's just shadows, or bad lighting, or my eyes playing tricks on me. I remind myself that peripheral vision isn't perfect, that the brain fills in gaps, especially when you're alone and your mind has too much time to wander. But the problem is that it doesn't happen once. It happens every time, every single time I'm alone, without fail. I go back to watching the screen, trying to ignore the feeling crawling up my spine. I tell myself not to look left again, but it's impossible. Curiosity and fear pull my eyes away, whether I want them to or not. And again, there they are, faces, watching, silent. Gone the second I try to focus on them. It's like they only exist when I'm not looking straight at them, like they're hiding just outside the edges of my vision, where I can't fully prove they're real. Sometimes, instead of faces, I see something else. Those are the better days. On those days, I see wisps of light drifting through the hallway or cutting across the kitchen. They move quickly, like flashes or streaks, almost gentle compared to the faces. They don't feel as heavy, not as threatening. I still notice them, still feel that jolt of surprise, but the fear isn't as deep. I can almost convince myself those are just reflections, headlights from outside, or light bending in strange ways. I prefer those days. They feel easier to handle, easier to explain away. But the days with the faces are different. Those days stick with me long after the TV is turned off. Even when I'm still staring at the screen, I feel watched. Not in a dramatic way, not like something is about to jump out at me, but in a quiet, constant way, like I'm not really alone, even though I know I am. The silence of the house feels louder. Every small noise stands out. The refrigerator humming, the faint creak of the floor, the air moving through the vents. Each sound feels amplified, like the house itself is breathing around me. I try different things to make it stop. Sometimes I turn on more lights, hoping brightness will chase whatever my eyes keep catching away. Other times, I change where I sit, adjusting my angle so the hallway isn't directly in my peripheral vision. But it doesn't really matter. If it's not the hallway, it's another dark corner. If it's not the kitchen, it's a doorway. The faces always find a place to appear, just far enough from my direct gaze. What makes it worse is how real it feels in the moment. Even though they disappear when I look at them, the fear doesn't disappear with them. My heart still races. My hands still feel tense. There's always that lingering thought that maybe, just maybe, one time they won't disappear. Maybe one time I'll look directly at them and something will still be there. That thought alone is enough to make my stomach twist. I've tried to analyze it logically. I know the brain can play tricks, especially when someone is tired, anxious, or alone. I know peripheral vision is more sensitive to movement and shapes, not detail, and that it can turn shadows into things that look real. I know all of that. But knowing it doesn't stop the feeling. It doesn't stop the fear that creeps in when I'm sitting there, pretending to be relaxed while my eyes keep betraying me. Sometimes I wonder if being alone is what triggers it. When other people are home, the house feels different, lived in, grounded. The noises make sense. The shadows don't feel as deep. But when I'm alone, it's like the house changes. The same walls, the same rooms, but a different atmosphere. It feels heavier, like the air itself is watching me, along with whatever my eyes keep catching. I've also noticed how careful I've become without even realizing it. I avoid sitting too still for too long. I keep my phone nearby, just in case I need to distract myself or call someone. I choose shows that are louder, brighter, full of dialogue, anything to keep my mind occupied. And silence feels dangerous now, like it gives those faces more room to exist. At night, it's worse. The darkness makes everything blur together, and my peripheral vision becomes even less trustworthy. Shadows stretch longer. Corners feel deeper. Even with lights on, the edges of the room feel unstable. I catch myself glancing left again and again, bracing myself for what I might see. And almost every time I see something, faces, shapes, movement, gone when I look. After a while, exhaustion sets in. Not just physical tiredness, but mental exhaustion from being on edge for so long. I hate that something so small, so hard to explain, has such a strong grip on me. I hate that I can't just sit and relax like I used to. I miss the feeling of being truly alone without feeling watched. The strangest part is that I can't tell if it's fear or curiosity that keeps pulling my eyes away from the screen. Part of me doesn't want to see anything at all. Another part of me wants to understand it, wants proof, wants answers. But all I ever get are glimpses, enough to scare me, not enough to explain anything. When I finally turn off the TV and get up from the couch, I move quickly. I don't linger. I don't look around more than I have to. I turn off the lights and head to my room, closing doors behind me. Even though I know a closed door won't really change anything, it just makes me feel a little safer. Lying in bed afterward, the images replay in my mind. The faces stacked together, the way they disappear, the flashes of light on better days. I stare into the darkness, wondering if my eyes will betray me again even there. And sometimes I keep my eyes open longer than I should, afraid of what I might see when I close them. I don't know what causes it. I don't know why it only happens when I'm alone. I don't know why my peripheral vision insists on showing me things that vanish the moment I try to face them. All I know is that it's real to me in the moment, and that fear doesn't care whether something can be explained or not. Every time I'm home alone, I brace myself for it. I sit on the couch, the hallway and kitchen to my left, the screen in front of me, and I wait. I tell myself, maybe today will be one of the good days. Maybe today it will just be wisps of light, or maybe nothing at all. But deep down, I already know how it usually goes. I'll look away just for a second, and there they'll be again. Faces, watching, gone. And the house will feel a little less empty than it should. I was 16 at the time, and my older sister had asked me to dog sit and keep an eye on her house while she was away. I remember feeling a little proud that she trusted me with it. It wasn't my house, and it was bigger and quieter than the place I lived, which already made it feel strange. It was winter, deep winter, the kind where everything outside feels dead and frozen, and that night there was a full-on storm. Wind howling, rain hitting the windows hard enough to rattle them, branches scraping against the side of the house. Even before anything happened, the weather alone made the house feel isolated. The dogs were the only real comfort. They were used to the house, and usually pretty calm, but the storm had them a bit on edge. I tried to distract myself with TV and snacks, in telling myself it was just another night and that I'd be fine. Still, there's something about being alone in someone else's house that makes every sound feel unfamiliar. Every creak feels louder. Every shadow feels wrong. At around 10 p.m., the doorbell rang. Not just a normal ring. Someone held it down. The sound didn't stop. It just kept going, loud and sharp, cutting straight through the house. Instantly, the dogs went absolutely insane, barking, snarling, running toward the front door like they were ready to tear someone apart. My heart jumped straight into my throat. At first, I thought it was someone needing help because of the storm. Maybe a neighbor, maybe someone's car had broken down. I grabbed my courage, walked to the door and opened it. The second I opened it, the ringing stopped, and no one was there. The porch was empty. Rain was pouring down, wind blowing sideways, and the street looked completely deserted. No person, no movement, nothing. I stood there for a few seconds, confused, letting the cold air and rain's spray hit my face. I remember thinking maybe someone ran off as a joke, or maybe it was some stupid prank by kids who thought it was funny to mess with houses during a storm. I shut the door, locked it, and tried to laugh it off. About 10 minutes later, it happened again. The bell was pressed down, continuous, exactly the same as before. The dogs lost their minds again, barking louder than before, throwing themselves at the door. This time, I didn't go straight to answer it. I waited, listening, hoping the ringing would stop on its own. It didn't. Eventually, I forced myself to open the door again. The moment I did, the ringing stopped. And again, there was no one there. Just the storm, the darkness and the empty porch. That was when the feeling started to change. It stopped feeling annoying and started feeling wrong. Over the next hour, it kept happening. Sometimes 5 minutes apart, sometimes 10. Always the same pattern. The bell would be held down, non-stop. The dogs would explode into barking. My stomach would drop. I'd open the door, and the sound would stop instantly, leaving nothing but silence and rain. No footsteps running away, no shadows, no explanation. I started checking everything. I went around the house, looking at the back doors, wondering if there was another bell somewhere, or if something was malfunctioning. I checked windows. I checked locks. I even stepped outside briefly with a flashlight, scanning the yard. half expecting to see someone hiding just out of view. There was nothing. I tried calling my sister, but she didn't answer. I called again, straight to voicemail. That made it worse. I suddenly felt very young and very alone. I didn't want to call my parents and admit I was scared over a doorbell, but the pit in my stomach kept growing. By the third or fourth time, my hands were shaking. The dogs weren't just barking anymore. They sounded panicked. They'd run back and forth between me and the door, whining and growling, reacting like something was seriously wrong. Animals don't usually react like that to nothing. Every time the bell rang, it felt like someone was right on the other side of the door, watching, waiting. My mind started going to darker places. What if someone was messing with me on purpose? What if they were trying to see if anyone was home? What if they were waiting for me to open the door at the wrong moment? The storm made everything worse. The wind masked any outside sounds, and the rain made it impossible to see clearly through the windows. At some point, I stopped opening the door right away. I'd wait for the ringing to stop on its own. Sometimes it would, sometimes it wouldn't, and I'd eventually force myself to open the door just to make it stop. Every time, the result was the same, nothing there. I never found out what caused it. Later, when I finally got my sister on the phone, she had no explanation. She suggested it might have been the wind or some kind of electrical issue caused by the storm. That explanation made sense logically, but it didn't explain how the ringing always stopped the second I opened the door. It didn't explain the dog's reaction, and it didn't explain the feeling in my gut that something wasn't right. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed on the couch with the lights on, the dogs curled up as close to me as possible. Every sound made me jump. Every gust of wind made me tense. I kept staring at the front door, expecting the bell to start ringing again at any moment. When morning finally came, I felt exhausted, shaky, and relieved all at once. To this day, I still don't know what it was. Maybe it really was the weather. Maybe the storm messed with the wiring. But even now, years later, I remember exactly how it felt standing there in the doorway, rain blowing in, silence stretching out in front of me where someone should have been. Sometimes the scariest things aren't what you see, they're what you can't explain. This happened about 10 years ago, and even now, when I think back on it, I still don't have a solid explanation for what actually took place. It's one of those moments that felt completely normal while it was happening, and only later, when everything stopped making sense, did the fear creep in. At the time I didn't scream, I didn't panic, and I didn't even feel scared right away. It was only after I replayed it over and over in my head that it began to feel deeply unsettling. That day felt ordinary. Nothing strange about the weather, nothing strange about the house, nothing strange about the mood. It was just a normal day with family around. The kids were outside playing, running around, laughing, making the kind of noise kids always make when they're having fun and don't want to be inside. The adults were out of the house, running errands or doing whatever they had planned that day. I was under the impression that I was completely alone inside. The house itself was quiet in that familiar way, not silent, but calm. You know the kind of quiet where you can hear the hum of the house itself. The distant sounds of kids outside came through the windows, muffled and harmless. Nothing about it felt threatening or wrong. I wasn't on edge. I wasn't tired or stressed. My mind was clear. I went downstairs to one of the rooms because I needed hangers. It was one of those small, practical tasks you don't really think about. I needed hangers, so I went to look for them. That's it. No distractions, no rushing. I remember walking into the room and scanning around, trying to remember where they were usually kept. That's when I noticed my niece. I didn't turn fully to look at her. I saw her through my peripheral vision, standing nearby. It didn't surprise me at all. That's the part that still bothers me. There was no shock, no moment of confusion. My brain accepted her presence instantly, as if she had always been there, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. She was close enough that I could sense her movement and shape, but I didn't look directly at her face. I didn't feel the need to. I just assumed she was there. Kids wander in and out of rooms all the time, especially when they're bored or curious. Nothing about it felt unusual. So I spoke to her casually, the way you do when you're not giving something much thought. I asked if she could go upstairs and grab some hangers from the closet. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't feel rushed. It was just a normal request. I remember that she seemed to respond. I can't say for sure if she nodded or said anything out loud because I wasn't looking directly at her face. But there was a clear sense of acknowledgement. The request was understood. She turned and went toward the stairs. I watched her walk away. I saw her moving up the stairs. Her footsteps were light, like a child's always are. I remember thinking nothing of it. I stayed downstairs, continuing what I was doing, fully expecting her to come back down in a minute or two with the hangers. And then everything fell apart. Suddenly, the front door opened. I heard it clearly. The sound of the door opening, voices coming in, the familiar noise of kids returning inside. I turned toward the sound without any concern, expecting to see the kids coming back in from outside. That's when I saw my niece. She walked in through the front door with my kids. At first, my brain stalled, just for a second. It was like my thoughts hit a wall and stopped. I looked at her, then looked again, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. She was outside this whole time. She had never been upstairs. She had never gone to get the hangers. I asked her how she got outside. The words came out automatically, but even as I spoke them, I knew something was wrong. I asked where the hangers were. I asked how she had gotten from upstairs to outside so quickly. None of it made sense. She looked at me like I had lost my mind. Her expression was pure confusion, not fear, not guilt, just genuine confusion. She told me she had been outside the entire time, playing with the other kids. She hadn't come inside. She hadn't gone upstairs. She had no idea what I was talking about. The kids backed her up. They all said she'd been with them the whole time. I stood there, frozen. I knew what I had seen, or at least I knew what I thought I had seen. I knew I had spoken to someone. I knew I'd watched someone go up the stairs. I hadn't imagined asking for hangers. I hadn't imagined seeing a small figure move away from me. Trying to shake it off, I went upstairs. I don't know what I expected to find. Maybe nothing. Maybe proof that I had imagined the whole thing. Maybe an empty closet that would confirm I had never sent anyone up there at all. But when I walked into the bedroom, my stomach dropped. The hangers were there. They were spread out on the bed, not neatly stacked, not placed carefully, just laid out, as if someone had grabbed them and dropped them there. Exactly where you would put them if you were a child, asked to fetch hangers, and didn't think twice about where to leave them. I stood there staring at them for a long time. There was no logical explanation that fit everything. If my niece hadn't gone upstairs, then who had? If no one else was in the house, then who had answered me? Who had walked up the stairs? Who had placed the hangers on the bed? I tried to reason it out. I replayed the timeline over and over in my head. I questioned my memory. I asked myself if I had mistaken something, if my brain had filled in gaps without me realizing it. But the problem was, it all felt too real, too complete. I hadn't felt tired. I hadn't felt distracted. I hadn't felt scared. It wasn't like my mind was playing tricks on me in the dark or late at night. This was broad daylight, a normal day, a clear head. I didn't tell anyone right away, partly because I didn't know how to explain it without sounding crazy, partly because I hoped that if I ignored it, the unease would fade. But it didn't. The more time passed, the more disturbing it became. What really gets to me is how natural it all felt in the moment. There was no sense of alarm. No moment where something felt off until it was already over. Whatever I saw fit perfectly into reality, seamlessly, without triggering any warning signs. Even now, years later, I can still picture it clearly. The room, the way she stood beside me, the movement toward the stairs, the hangers on the bed. None of it has faded. I don't know if it was some kind of mental glitch or something I can't explain or something I don't want to put a name to. I just know that for a short stretch of time, reality didn't behave the way it was supposed to. And to this day, I still don't know what the hell happened. When I was in first grade, something happened that I still can't explain, even now that I'm older and have tried to look at it from every logical angle I can think of. At the time, I didn't even have the words for how strange it felt. I just carried it quietly, like a secret that didn't belong to anyone else. It was recess, a normal school day, nothing special about it. The sky was bright in that washed-out way it gets in the middle of the afternoon, and the pavement was warm enough that you could feel the heat through your clothes if you sat on it. I was hanging out with a friend near the basketball court. He was obsessed with shooting hoops and trying trick shots. I wasn't really into basketball, so I sat off to the side with my Nintendo DS, completely focused on a game I'd been stuck on for days. I remember the exact feeling of the DS in my hands, the plastic edges pressing into my palms, the tiny clicking of the buttons, the music of the level looping over and over. I was sitting cross-legged on the pavement, leaning forward slightly, totally absorbed. Around me, there was the usual recess noise, kids shouting, sneakers squeaking, a ball bouncing in a steady rhythm. It was all background sound, the kind you don't really notice because it's always there. My friend called over to me from the court. He asked if I thought he could make a shot from halfway across. I didn't even look up. I just told him he could try, but he probably wouldn't make it. I said it automatically, still staring at my screen, timing a jump in the game. It was such a small, ordinary moment, the kind of thing that happens 1,000 times in childhood and never gets remembered. Then I heard my dad's voice. He was right next to me asking what I meant. The voice didn't come from far away. It wasn't muffled or distant like a memory. It was clear and close, the way someone sounds when they're standing in the same room. For a split second, my brain tried to place it. It didn't fit. My dad wasn't supposed to be at school. He wasn't supposed to be anywhere near a basketball court. I looked up. The world changed in an instant. I wasn't outside anymore. I was sitting on the carpet in my living room. It was dark out. The only light came from a lamp in the corner and the glow of the TV. My dad was standing a few feet away, looking down at me with a confused expression, like he'd asked me a question and was waiting for an answer. My heart slammed into my chest so hard it hurt. I was in the exact same position, cross-legged, leaning forward, DS in my hands. I looked down at the screen, expecting it to be different, expecting some kind of break in the illusion. But it was the same game, the same level, the same exact spot in the level. The character was standing in the same place I'd left them at recess. Even the music was at the same point in its loop, like no time had passed at all. For a moment I couldn't speak. My brain felt scrambled, like I'd been spun around too fast. I kept looking from the DS to my dad to the room around me. The living room looked completely normal. The couch with the worn armrest, the coffee table with a stack of magazines, the faint smell of dinner lingering in the air. Everything was exactly where it should have been. My dad repeated his question, asking what I meant. Apparently I'd said something out loud right before he spoke, something connected to what I'd been telling my friend at school. I don't even remember what words came out of my mouth. I just remember the feeling of being caught between two places, like my mind hadn't fully landed yet. I answered him automatically. I don't remember what I said. Something small and forgettable because he nodded and went back to whatever he was doing. The world kept moving. The TV played softly. A car passed outside. It was just a normal evening. But inside my head, Nothing was normal. I sat there frozen for a long time, staring at the game screen without really seeing it. I tried to replay the last few minutes in my mind. I had been at recess. I could still feel the sun on my skin. I could still hear the echo of the basketball hitting the pavement. The memory wasn't foggy or dreamlike. It was sharp and solid, like something that had just happened seconds ago. I checked my clothes. I was wearing what I'd worn to school that day, but they were clean, not dusty from sitting outside. My shoes were off, lined up by the door the way my mom insisted. There was no sign I'd ever been anywhere except home. I didn't tell my dad. I didn't tell my mom. I didn't tell anyone. Part of it was that I didn't think I could explain it without sounding ridiculous. I was a kid, but I already understood the difference between something that sounds believable and something that doesn't. If I'd said I'd been at school one second and home the next, they would have laughed or told me I'd imagined it. Maybe they would have blamed it on a dream or daydreaming too hard. So I kept quiet. That night continued like any other. Dinner, homework, brushing my teeth, getting into bed. But the whole time I had this quiet buzzing in the back of my mind. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the basketball court. Every time I opened them, I expected the living room to disappear. It felt like I'd slipped somehow, like I'd stepped between two moments and landed wrong. For a long time, I convinced myself it had been a dream. That was the easiest explanation. Kids fall asleep in class. Kids daydream. Maybe I'd imagined the whole recess scene while sitting at home, and my brain stitched it together into a fake memory. But the more I thought about it over the years, the less that explanation satisfied me. I don't remember dreams clearly, and not even important ones. They fade almost immediately, leaving behind only a feeling. This memory never faded. I can still see the cracks in the pavement where I was sitting. I can still hear my friend's voice asking about the shot. The details have stayed crisp in a way dreams never do. What bothers me most is the continuity. The game didn't reset. There was no jump forward or backward. It was like the moment at recess and the moment in my living room were the same moment, just in two different places. As if I'd blinked and reality had swapped backgrounds. I've tried to come up with scientific explanations as I got older. Memory glitches, dissociation, a child's brain misfiring under stress. I've read about how time perception can warp, how the mind can create convincing false memories. All of those explanations are possible, maybe even likely, but none of them erased the feeling I had when I looked up and saw my dad standing there. It wasn't confusion alone. It was a deep, physical shock, like stepping off a stair you thought was there and finding empty air. My body reacted before my thoughts did. My stomach dropped. My skin prickled. Every instinct screamed that something impossible had just happened. I went back to school the next day and everything was normal. My friend was there. The basketball court was the same. I remember staring at the spot where I'd been sitting, half expecting something to feel different. It didn't. Recess came and went like it always did. No one mentioned anything strange. As far as the world was concerned, nothing had happened. But I never sat in that exact spot again. Even now, years later, the memory still gives me a small jolt when it surfaces. I don't think about it often, but when I do, it feels close, like it's waiting just under the surface of everyday life. A reminder that my experience of the world isn't as solid as I like to believe. I don't claim I teleported. I don't say I traveled through time. Those words feel too big and dramatic. All I know is that for one brief moment, my reality snapped from one place to another without warning, and I was aware of the snap as it happened. Maybe it was a trick of the brain. Maybe it was a childhood glitch that has a perfectly boring explanation hidden somewhere in neuroscience textbooks. I'm open to that. I like the idea that there's a reason, even if I don't know it yet. But there's a small part of me that remembers the sun on my face, the sound of the ball, or the weight of the DS in my hands, and wonders if reality is thinner than we think, if there are seams we don't usually see, and once in a while someone slips across one by accident. I've never had anything like it happen again. No missing time, no sudden jumps. Life has been steady and predictable in the best way, and maybe that's why the memory stands out so sharply. It's a single crack in an otherwise smooth wall. I still see that kid sitting on the pavement, absorbed in a game, answering a friend without looking up. I still feel the shock of hearing my dad's voice where it didn't belong. And I still remember the exact instant when the world flipped from bright afternoon to dark living room, as cleanly as switching off a light. Everything continued normally after that. Homework got done. I grew up. Years stacked on top of that day. But the memory stayed, untouched by time, sitting there like a bookmark in a story I never fully understood. And every once in a while, when I'm tired or lost in thought, I catch myself half expecting to look up and find I'm somewhere else entirely, holding the same object in the same position, with no explanation except that the world decided to skip. In 1975, I was a young Army helicopter pilot running night training out near Fort Hood, Texas, back when a lot of what we were doing felt like the edge of a new doctrine. The Cold War hung over everything. The training wasn't just about flying, it was about survival in a future none of us wanted to imagine, but all of us were preparing for. One of the newer ideas at the time was terrain masking, using the land itself to hide from enemy radar. The theory was simple: stay low enough and tight enough to the ground that you disappear into the clutter. In practice, it meant flying at night, lights out, threading a machine through darkness where mistakes didn't get corrected. They just ended. That night was moonless, the kind of black that swallows depth and distance. We were flying in blackout conditions, no visible lights except what instruments barely allowed. Outside the cockpit there was almost nothing to anchor your eyes to. The horizon didn't exist. The sky and land blended into one seamless void. You flew by trust. Trust in the gauges, trust in your training, trust in the person next to you. We were following a shallow draw with a seasonal creek cutting through it, the kind of winding depression that snakes quietly across Texas terrain. It was perfect for the exercise. The banks rose just enough to give us cover, and the trees clustered thick along the waterline. Cottonwoods mostly, tall and soft-leafed, the kind that look gentle in daylight. At night they were invisible walls. I was at the controls. My co-pilot was head down in the map, tracking our path and timing. We were flying low and slow, skimming treetop to treetop. The helicopter felt alive in my hands, every vibration transmitting through the cyclic and pedals. Night flying sharpens your senses in a strange way. Your world shrinks to the cockpit and the immediate air around you. Every sound matters. Every tiny shift in engine tone or rotor rhythm carries meaning. The air was steady, no turbulence, no warning. And then I knew. It wasn't a thought in the normal sense. It didn't arrive as an image or a calculation. There was no moment where I spotted an obstacle or processed a visual cue. It was a complete, finished certainty that dropped into me all at once. Climb now, not consider climbing, not maybe climb or die. To this day I can't describe it any better than that. It was like a switch flipped somewhere below conscious thought. My body reacted before my mind caught up, or I hauled back on the controls and poured everything the aircraft had into a vertical emergency climb. The helicopter roared in protest as I pulled power, the engine screaming and the rotor biting hard into the air. The nose pitched up toward the stars and gravity shoved me back into the seat. In the chin bubble, the curved plexiglass window beneath my feet, I saw it. Leaves. Not a silhouette, not a shadow. Leaves, individual cottonwood leaves pressing and sliding across the plexiglass, pushed aside by the nose of the aircraft as we surged upward. They were so close, I could see their pale undersides flash in the faint starlight. We hadn't missed the tree by yards. We hadn't missed it by feet. We had gone through it. If I had been a fraction of a second slower, the rotor would have hit first. At that speed and altitude, or there would have been no recovery, no dramatic struggle, just impact and silence. The climb lasted only a couple of seconds, but it stretched into something enormous inside my head. When I leveled off a few hundred feet above the canopy, my hands were still locked on the controls, my breath shallow and sharp. The helicopter steadied, but the adrenaline kept everything vibrating. My co-pilot lifted his head from the map. His eyes were wide, reflecting the instrument lights. For a moment we just stared at each other, both of us fully aware of how close we'd come to not having a next moment. He broke the silence first. "How did you see that fucking tree?" I opened my mouth to answer and nothing came out, because I hadn't seen it. There was no heroic spotting of danger, no flash of skill that saved us. I didn't catch movement. I didn't notice a darker shape against the dark. There was simply that absolute, undeniable command that erupted inside me and forced my hands to move. By the time my brain started asking why, we were already climbing. I told him something vague. I don't even remember what. Pilots are good at accepting narrow escapes without dissecting them too deeply in the moment. We finished the training run. We landed, we filled out paperwork. On the outside, it became just another story, filed under close call, one of the many that float around aviation circles. But it never sat right with me. I went over that moment again and again in the years that followed. I replayed it the way pilots do, frame by frame, searching for the input that must have triggered the reaction. A shadow, a change in airflow, a peripheral flicker. It was something my eyes caught that never made it into conscious memory. That's the explanation I leaned on when I needed one. The brain is faster than awareness. Maybe I saw it without knowing I saw it, but even that felt incomplete. It wasn't a reaction to a sight. It was a conviction, a full-body certainty that arrived finished, like a message already stamped and sealed. There was no hesitation, no internal debate, just action. I went on to fly helicopters for 37 years after that night. Combat zones, rescue operations, training missions, thousands upon thousands of hours in the air. I built a career on judgment, discipline, and a respect for the thin margins that keep pilots alive. I never had a major accident, not once. I'm proud of that record. But I'm also honest enough to admit that skill alone doesn't carry a pilot through a lifetime of flying. Luck rides in the cockpit, whether you acknowledge it or not. That night near Fort Hood stands apart from every other close call because I can trace the chain of cause and effect in the rest. Weather decision, mechanical failure, human error corrected in time. There's a logic to them, even when they're frightening. That tree has no chain. There's just a gap where perception should be, and inside that gap is the reason I'm still here. Over the years, I've heard other pilots describe similar moments. A sudden urge to abort a landing seconds before a crosswind gust slams the runway. A decision to circle once more before descending, only to discover traffic in the blind spot. Most of us talk about it carefully, half joking, because aviation culture worships rationality. You don't build safety protocols around intuition, you build them around data, and yet the best pilots I've known all respect that quiet voice. Not superstition, not mysticism, something more practical and harder to define. A pattern recognition engine buried deep in the brain, processing thousands of subtle cues faster than conscious thought can follow. Maybe that's all it was. Maybe my eyes and ears fed my nervous system just enough information to scream climb before I understood why. If that's the explanation, it's still a humbling one, because it means part of what keeps us alive operates below the level we like to believe we control. I never told my co-pilot the truth of it, not because I was ashamed, but because I didn't have words that wouldn't sound ridiculous in a debriefing room. I just knew isn't something you write in a flight report. So the moment stayed between me and the night air over Texas. Even now, decades later, I can close my eyes and see those leaves brushing the plexiglass. I can feel the strain of the climb in my arms and the weight of the aircraft fighting gravity. I can hear his voice in my headset, sharp with adrenaline, asking the question I never answered. How did you see that tree? I didn't. Something in me did. And whatever it was, it gave me the gift of another lifetime in the sky. I'm not someone who grew up believing every creak in a house meant a ghost. I was a pretty practical kid. I liked knowing how things worked. I liked explanations. But there was a stretch of time where we lived in a house that slowly wore down all my easy logic. It wasn't one big dramatic event. It was a build-up of small things that stacked on top of each other until the air in that place felt heavy all the time. From the first few weeks, my room never felt empty. I don't mean I saw figures standing in the corner or heard voices whispering my name. It was subtler than that, which somehow made it worse. I always felt watched, even during the day, with sunlight pouring in and the normal sounds of the neighborhood drifting through the window. There was this constant awareness in the back of my mind, like someone was standing just outside my field of vision, patient and quiet. At night it was stronger. If I left my bedroom door open, I'd swear I'd see someone pass by in the hallway, not clearly. It was always out of the corner of my eye. A shape, a shift in darkness, a suggestion of movement. Every time I turned my head, the hallway was empty. Just the pale strip of light from the bathroom nightlight and the stillness of a sleeping house. I told myself it was my imagination adjusting to a new place. Houses have personalities. Some feel warm right away, some feel cold. I figured this one just needed time. But then the cats started reacting. We had 2 cats who were lazy in the way only well-fed house cats can be. They'd spend most of their days sleeping in sun patches, barely lifting their heads unless food was involved. When they slept in my room, they were dead weight. You could nudge them, and they'd just groan and stretch. Except sometimes, without warning, both of them would snap awake at the same time. They'd sit straight up like someone had pulled invisible strings. Their ears would lock forward. Their eyes would fix on the doorway, not blinking, not moving, just staring. The first time it happened, I laughed and tried to follow their gaze, expecting to see a bug or a shadow. There was nothing there. I called their names. I waved my hand in front of their faces. They didn't react. It was like I wasn't in the room anymore. All their attention was glued to that empty doorway. The fur along their backs would puff slightly. Not enough to look dramatic, but enough to tell me they weren't relaxed. It would last for minutes. Minutes of silence where the only sound was my breathing and the hum of the house. Eventually they'd relax all at once, like a switch flipped. They'd shake themselves off and curl back up, pretending nothing happened. Meanwhile, I'd be sitting there with my skin crawling. That became a regular thing, not daily, but often enough that it stopped being funny. Every time they locked onto the doorway, my chest tightened. Animals don't pretend. They don't play tricks on themselves. They react to what they perceive, and they kept perceiving something I couldn't see. The bathroom incident was the first time something physical happened. My sister had this shelf above the sink packed with beauty products. Bottles, brushes, little jars, all carefully arranged. The shelf had a lip on it, about 2 inches high, to keep things from sliding off. It was sturdy, My dad had installed it himself, and he didn't do sloppy work. I was brushing my teeth when, without warning, everything flew forward. There wasn't a slow slide, there wasn't a wobble. Every item launched out at once, like someone had swept an arm across the shelf. Bottles bounced over the lip and slammed into the sink. Glass shattered, plastic clattered. The noise exploded in the small bathroom. I jumped back so fast I hit the door. For a second I just stared, toothbrush still in my mouth, trying to process what I'd seen. The shelf was fine. It wasn't loose. It wasn't tilted. If something had fallen naturally, it would have slipped, not leapt. The motion had been outward, forceful. My sister came running, yelling, asking what I did. I told her I hadn't touched it. She didn't believe me at first. Why would she? From her perspective, it looked like I'd knocked everything off and was denying it. But when my dad checked the shelf and confirmed it was solid, the argument faded into uncomfortable silence. We cleaned up the mess. Nobody said the obvious thing out loud. After that, the house felt different, like whatever tension had been quietly building had finally announced itself. The dresser was the breaking point for my sister. It had belonged to our grandmother, over 100 years old, solid wood, heavy enough that moving it took 2 adults and a lot of complaining. It sat against the wall in my sister's room like a monument. That thing didn't wobble, it didn't shift. It barely acknowledged gravity. One night, sometime after midnight, the house shook with a crash that ripped everyone out of sleep. I bolted upright in bed, heart hammering. For a split second I thought a car had hit the house. Then I heard my sister screaming. We all ran to her room. The dresser was on its side, drawers spilled open, clothes everywhere. It had fallen forward into the middle of the room, not tipped, not slid, fallen. My sister was backed into a corner, crying. She kept saying she heard someone push it. Not a creak, not a gradual groan. A shove, a deliberate, heavy sound like hands slamming into wood. My dad tried to recreate it the next day, testing the balance, pushing lightly to see if it was unstable. It took serious force to move it. The idea that it had simply toppled on its own didn't sit right with anyone. But again, no one wanted to say the alternative out loud. After that, my mom and sister started accusing me of sneaking around the house at night. They'd yell my name from the hallway, angry, telling me to stop creeping around. I'd answer from my room, confused, asking what they were talking about. They insisted they saw a man-shaped shadow moving through the house. About my height, my build, just a dark outline slipping past doorways. The problem was, sometimes I wasn't even home. Once I was at a friend's place and came back to my mom furious, asking why I'd been walking around when I said I'd be out. When I told her I'd been gone all night, the anger drained out of her face and left something else behind, something quieter and worse. We started leaving more lights on. Nobody admitted it was because we were scared. We framed it as convenience, safety. But the house stopped going fully dark after that. There was always a lamp glowing somewhere, pushing back the corners. The final confirmation came by accident. We ran into the previous owner one afternoon at a grocery store. My mom recognized her and struck up a casual conversation. They talked about the neighborhood, the weather, normal small talk. Then my mom, in the most offhand tone imaginable, asked if she'd ever experienced anything strange in the house. The woman's face crumpled. She didn't hesitate. She didn't laugh it off. Tears welled up instantly. She said no one had believed her. She said yes, she'd experienced things, a lot of things. She didn't even go into detail. She didn't need to. The look on her face said enough. It was relief mixed with lingering fear, like she'd been carrying the weight of that house long after leaving it. My mom didn't press. The conversation ended awkwardly, both of them shaken. When she told us later, well, the room went silent. There it was. External confirmation. Not proof in a scientific sense, but validation that we weren't the only ones who felt it. Not long after that, I moved out. I didn't make a big announcement about why. I just left when the opportunity came and didn't look back. The strange thing is, once I was gone, the tension I'd gotten used to disappeared. I hadn't realized how tightly wound I'd been living there until I felt the absence of it. My new place felt light. Empty in the best way. I don't miss that house. Even now, when I think about it, I don't picture dramatic ghost scenes. I picture the cat staring at nothing, the feeling of eyes on my back, the sound of that dresser hitting the floor. It was the accumulation that did it. A steady erosion of the idea that a home is automatically safe just because it has walls and a roof. I'm still not someone who jumps to supernatural conclusions. I like explanations. I believe most strange things have roots in physics, psychology, or coincidence. But I also believe there are experiences that sit in the gray area where explanation hasn't caught up yet. That house lived in that gray area. Maybe there was a rational answer to every single event. Faulty perception, structural quirks, shared anxiety feeding off itself. That's possible. But living inside it didn't feel like a list of separate incidents. It felt like a presence, a personality threaded through the building that didn't care whether we understood it. All I know is that when I left, I slept better. No footsteps in the hallway, no shadows slipping past doors, no animals staring at empty space like they were watching someone breathe. Just quiet, the ordinary, comforting quiet of a place that belonged fully to the living. And after a while, I realized how rare and precious that kind of quiet actually is. There was a small door in my childhood bedroom that led into the attic space. Not the big attic above the house, but the narrow crawl space that ran along the second floor like a hidden hallway inside the walls. I was around 11 when we moved in, and from the start that door became part of my routine in a way I never questioned. A couple of times a week, I'd walk into my room and notice it was open. Not wide open, just enough that the darkness behind it showed like a black rectangle on the wall. I'd sigh, walk over, and shut it. It felt the same as closing a cabinet someone forgot or pushing in a chair left out at the table. Mild annoyance, zero fear. I assumed my mom had been up there grabbing storage boxes and hadn't latched it properly. It never occurred to me that it might be anything else. This went on for months without me thinking twice about it. It was just a tiny chore that belonged to the room, like straightening my blanket or turning off the light. The door had a real knob, not a loose panel. You had to turn it to open it. That's important, but at the time it didn't feel important. It was just a detail. The first time I actually talked about it was during a stupid joke. My mum was scolding me for leaving clothes on the floor. I fired back with the kind of sarcastic comment only a kid thinks is clever. I told her if she was going to lecture me about messes, she could at least start shutting the attic door after she was done up there. I expected her to roll her eyes. Instead, she looked confused. She told me she hadn't been in the attic in months. That answer didn't land right away. I laughed and told her she must have forgotten. She insisted she hadn't. We called my brother in and asked him. He shook his head. My dad said the same thing. None of them had been up there recently. That should have been the end of it. A misunderstanding, someone forgetting, but the certainty in their voices stuck with me. That night, when I went upstairs, I checked the door carefully before going to bed. It was closed tight. I remember turning the knob slightly, just to feel the latch catch. After school the next day, it was open. That was the first time I felt a little twist in my stomach. I didn't panic. I didn't think ghosts. I thought maybe I was the one forgetting. Maybe I wasn't closing it as firmly as I thought. So I started paying attention in a way I hadn't before. Every morning I'd shut it and test it. After school I'd check. After dinner, I'd check again. It became a quiet experiment I didn't tell anyone about. No matter how careful I was, it kept happening. Some days it stayed closed. Other days it would be open again by the time I went to bed. There was no pattern I could see. I started inventing explanations just to keep my brain calm. Maybe the frame was warped. Maybe pressure changes in the house were enough to pull it open. Maybe I was imagining how often it happened. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that the door had become aware of my attention. After a couple months of this silent routine, I decided to push it. Instead of closing it in the morning, I left it open on purpose. I wanted to see if it would close on its own. If the problem was mechanical, it should behave the same in reverse. I left for school thinking about that door more than I thought about homework. When I got home, it was still open. After dinner, still open. Before bed, still open. My plan had worked, but instead of feeling relieved, I felt worse. The open doorway looked wrong. The darkness inside seemed deeper now that I was staring at it on purpose. I climbed into bed and tried to ignore it. I lasted maybe 10 minutes. My mind kept circling back to that rectangle of black. Every creak of the house felt connected to it. Finally, I rolled over and stared straight at the opening. I told myself I was being ridiculous. It was just a storage crawl space, insulation, dust, old boxes. Then I saw the face. It wasn't a dramatic horror movie moment. There was no scream, no sudden movement, just a face, dimly lit by the faint light in my room, staring back at me from inside the attic, expressionless, still, no body attached that I could see, just the outline of a human face where there shouldn't have been one. For a second, my brain refused to process it. It tried to turn the shape into shadows, into a trick of my eyes. But the longer I looked, the clearer it became. Someone was there, watching. My body reacted before my thoughts did. I was out of bed and down the stairs in a blur, my feet barely touching the steps. I burst into my parents' room, shouting that someone was in my attic. My brother stumbled out half awake and immediately started laughing at me, calling me an idiot, telling me I'd scared myself. My parents were more serious. My dad grabbed something heavy and went upstairs to check. There was nothing there. Of course there wasn't. He searched the crawl space with a flashlight, moving boxes, checking corners. Empty, dusty, silent. My brother never let me live it down. For him, it became proof that I had an overactive imagination. For me, it became something I didn't want to talk about again. I switched bedrooms with my brother not long after. I told everyone I just wanted a change. No one argued. About 6 months later, we moved to a bigger house because our family was expanding. The attic door faded into the background of my life. I tucked the memory away in the category of childhood fear, something embarrassing and exaggerated by time. If the story had ended there, I probably would have convinced myself it was nothing. 5 years later, I walked back into that house with a camcorder. I was a senior in high school by then, and my physics teacher was easily the best teacher I'd ever had. He was funny, patient, and the kind of guy who made complicated ideas feel simple. Toward the end of the year, a friend and I decided to take a VHS camcorder around town, filming random memories before graduation. Silly stuff, inside jokes, places we hung out. On a whim, we went to my old house. I knocked, explained who I was, and the teacher and his wife welcomed us in with surprising warmth. They gave us a full tour. I pointed out projects my dad had done that were still part of the place. It felt nostalgic and harmless. The house looked smaller than I remembered, like childhood places always do. Then, his wife led us upstairs to show us what used to be my room. It was a sewing room now. I stood there smiling, camera humming softly, and made a joke. I asked if they'd noticed anything strange in the room. I meant it lightly, half expecting her to laugh and say no. Instead, her face went blank in a way that drained the air out of the space. She asked what I meant. I tried to backtrack. I shrugged. I said something vague about the attic door. The moment I mentioned it, her expression shifted from confusion to recognition. She told us that every time she came up to sew, the attic door was open. My stomach dropped. She kept talking, almost relieved to finally say it out loud. On their second day in the house, their German shepherd had gone into that room. The dog refused to come back out. He started barking at the doorway, frantic, the kind of bark animals use when they're terrified. They tried to calm him, tried to pull him away, but he wouldn't stop. Then he jumped through the window. He landed on the tin roof over the porch and ran. He didn't come back until the next day. After that, he wouldn't go near the upstairs hallway at all, not even for food, not even when called. She told the story calmly, but there was a tightness in her voice, the kind people get when they've decided not to think too hard about something, but never really stopped feeling it. Hearing her confirm the door, the dog, the fear, turned my childhood memory from a private embarrassment into something shared. For a moment, all three of us just stood there. I thought about showing the tape to my family, proof that I hadn't imagined everything, proof that someone else had lived with the same strange detail, but the longer I held that thought, the less I wanted to reopen it. The house was behind us. We were safe. Our digging it back up felt unnecessary. I let it be. Even now, I don't tell the story as proof of ghosts. I don't claim I know what was in that attic. There are 100 explanations people smarter than me could suggest. Stress, perception, coincidence layered on coincidence. I'm open to all of it. What I can't shake is the look on her face before she spoke. It was the look of someone who had quietly filed away an experience because it didn't fit anywhere comfortable. My story gave hers shape. Hers gave mine weight. Together they formed something that didn't need a label to feel real. The face I saw was expressionless. That detail never changed in memory. It didn't snarl. It didn't grin. It just watched. And in a strange way, that calmness made it worse. Fear is easier to process when it looks like fear. A neutral stare leaves too much room for your imagination. I don't have the VHS tape anymore. It got lost somewhere in the chaos of moving after high school. Sometimes I wish I still had it, not as evidence, but as a snapshot of that moment when two separate timelines touched and confirmed each other. That experience didn't turn me into a believer in anything specific. It didn't send me chasing paranormal shows or ghost hunts. What it did was take away my ability to be a full non-believer. It carved out a small space in my worldview where uncertainty lives comfortably. I've never seen another face in a doorway. I've never lived in another house that carried that kind of tension. Life has been ordinary in the best possible way, but every once in a while, when I pass a small closed door in an unfamiliar place, I feel a faint echo of that childhood unease. Not panic, just awareness. A reminder that there are moments we can't neatly explain, and maybe we're not supposed to. Some experiences don't arrive to convert you. They arrive to stretch the edges of what you think is possible and then sit quietly in your memory, waiting. I'm older now. I've had years to smooth the story, to test it against logic, to question my younger self. The memory hasn't faded. If anything, it's sharpened around the edges. I can still see the dark rectangle. I can still feel the instant my heart recognized that something was wrong. And I still remember how normal the house looked from the outside. That's the part that stays with me most. Not the fear, not the face, just the fact that something deeply unsettling can hide inside something completely ordinary. And the world keeps turning like nothing happened. You go to school, you grow up, you move away. But somewhere in your past, there's a small door that didn't behave the way doors are supposed to. And you learn to live with the fact that you don't have to solve it for it to be real. Happy Halloween. I lived in a rundown house that was well over 100 years old during my junior year of college. It was the kind of place you rent because it's cheap and close to campus, not because it's comfortable. The landlord called it historic. We called it barely standing. The floors sloped, the windows rattled even when there was no wind, and every room carried that stale, dusty smell that never quite goes away no matter how much you clean. At first it felt like part of the charm. Old houses creak, old pipes knock, old wiring acts weird. We told ourselves all of that in the beginning. The third floor was the strangest part of the house. It had clearly been converted at some point into extra bedrooms, but it didn't feel finished. The ceiling was low and uneven, and the hallway was narrow enough that two people had to turn sideways to pass each other. The air up there always felt heavier than the rest of the house, like the heat didn't circulate properly. Even in winter it was stuffy. 2 of us had rooms up there, including me. The others refused to move upstairs, even when we offered to swap because, in their words, something about it feels off. The first weird thing we noticed was the batteries. Any electronic device we kept on the 3rd floor drained ridiculously fast. At first we blamed cheap batteries. We bought better ones. Same problem. My roommate's alarm clock would die every few days. My wireless mouse would work perfectly downstairs, but the moment I brought it up to my room, it would start cutting out and be dead by morning. We tested it as a joke. Well, fresh batteries in a flashlight worked fine in the kitchen. We carried it upstairs, left it on my desk, and the next day it barely flickered. We laughed it off, but the joke got less funny the more consistent it became. We even tried leaving devices in different parts of the house as an experiment. The basement, 1st floor, and 2nd floor were normal. Only the 3rd floor drained them, every time. We checked outlets, we checked wiring, nothing obvious. The landlord shrugged and said old houses were quirky. That explanation didn't satisfy us, but we didn't have another one. Then there were the footsteps. Anyone who has lived in an old building knows that wood expands and contracts. It pops and creaks, but this wasn't random. At night, when the house was quiet, we'd hear slow, deliberate steps moving down the hallway above the 2nd floor bedrooms, except no one was up there. Sometimes I'd freeze in bed listening to it. Step, pause, step, pause. It sounded like someone pacing, stopping outside doors, then continuing. More than once I opened my door expecting to catch a roommate sneaking around, but the hallway would be empty and still. The worst part wasn't the sound itself. It was the rhythm. It had intention. It didn't sound like a structure settling. It sounded like weight shifting from one foot to the other. My friend downstairs said he could hear it too, faint but clear, like someone walking directly above his ceiling. We started texting each other when it happened. "You up there?" "No, I'm in bed." That exchange happened more times than I can count. The basement had its own problems. None of us liked going down there alone. It wasn't just dark, it felt swallowed. The light switch was at the bottom of the stairs, so you had to walk down into blackness before you could see anything. The air smelled damp and metallic. The walls were exposed stone, sweating with moisture, and every sound echoed in a way that made it hard to tell direction. That's where we first heard the crying. At first it sounded like a cat, a thin, drawn-out wail that rose and fell. We assumed a stray had gotten trapped or crawled in somewhere. It happened late at night while we were watching TV. The sound floated up through the floor, soft but unmistakable. We muted the volume and just stared at each other. It came again, long, shaky, almost human. We grabbed flashlights and went down together, all 4 of us trying to act braver than we felt. The crying continued as we descended. It echoed off the stones so badly that it was impossible to tell where it was coming from. We followed it from one corner to another, stepping over old pipes and boxes left by previous tenants. The beam of my flashlight shook in my hand. Eventually we traced the sound to a small room in the back that was completely empty. No windows, no furniture, just bare floor and walls. The crying was coming from inside that space. We stood in the doorway expecting to see an animal. There was nothing. The moment we stepped in, the sound stopped. Not faded, stopped. The silence was so sudden, it rang in my ears. We didn't speak. We didn't joke. We just turned around and went back upstairs as fast as we could without admitting we were running. None of us wanted to be the last one up the stairs. After that, or nobody went into the basement alone unless it was absolutely necessary. The incident that scared us the most happened a few weeks later. I was in my room on the 3rd floor, sitting at my desk pretending to study. The house was quiet except for the usual background creaks. I remember glancing at the door to the stairwell because it slowly swung open. Not slammed, not drifted. It opened with a smooth, steady motion, like someone had turned the handle carefully. I assumed one of my roommates had come upstairs. I waited to hear footsteps. Nothing. Then, out of nowhere, my friend burst through the doorway and ran down the hall past my room so fast he almost slipped. His face was white. He didn't even look at me. He just kept going down the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. I jumped up and followed, my heart racing because whatever scared him clearly wasn't small. We found him in the kitchen trying to catch his breath. It took a minute before he could talk. When he did, his voice was shaky in a way I'd never heard before. He said he'd been upstairs grabbing a hoodie from his room. He was alone. As he turned to leave, he heard someone behind him say, very calmly and clearly, "Get out." Not whispered, not shouted, just a normal speaking voice, like someone standing right next to him. He spun around expecting to see one of us messing with him. His room was empty. The hallway was empty. The stairwell door was closed. He said the air felt thick, like pressure pushing against his ears. That's when he ran. We tried to rationalize it. Stress, imagination, sound carrying from another apartment. But we all knew how the house sounded. We knew the difference between muffled voices and something in the same room. He swore on everything he had that it wasn't a trick of acoustics. He said it felt directed at him, personal, like whoever said it was aware of him specifically. After that night, none of us laughed about the house anymore. The 3rd floor grew harder to sleep on. Every little noise snapped me awake. Sometimes I'd lie there, convinced I heard breathing that wasn't mine. I started keeping a lamp on because full darkness made the corners feel crowded. My batteries continued dying. My phone would lose charge even when plugged in. I began charging everything downstairs and carrying it up right before bed. Visitors noticed the atmosphere too. Friends would come over and comment that the house felt heavy. One girl refused to go upstairs after stepping into the hallway and immediately turning back around. She said it felt like walking into a room where an argument had just happened. Thick tension with no visible cause. We looked into the history of the place out of curiosity. The property records showed it had been standing since the early 1900s. Multiple families had lived there. At least one death was recorded in the house decades earlier, though we couldn't find details. We joked that we'd found our ghost, but the joke felt forced. What unsettled me most wasn't any single event. It was the consistency. The house had patterns. The 3rd floor drained power. The footsteps kept a pace. The basement cried and then went silent the moment confronted. The voice told my friend to leave in a tone that suggested we were the intruders, not it. We finished the lease because we were broke college students and moving wasn't an option. By the end of the year, we barely used the 3rd floor except to sleep. We spent most of our time crammed into the living room downstairs where the air felt normal. The day we moved out, I remember standing in my empty room and feeling relief instead of nostalgia. I didn't look back when I shut the door. I've lived in older buildings since then. I've heard creaks and pipes and drafts. None of them felt like that house. I don't claim to know what was happening there. Maybe there's a logical explanation buried in physics or wiring or acoustics, that we never found. Maybe our brains filled in gaps and fed off each other's fear. But I know how that place felt in my bones. It felt occupied. And whatever shared that space with us made it clear, at least once, that it didn't want company. The story ends here. If this one stayed with you, please leave a comment. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe so you are here for the next one. Until then, stay safe.